The first time my granddaughter called me Margaret, I thought I had misheard her. We were sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, the same table where she had eaten pancakes since she was small enough to need a booster seat. Lily was 7 now, all tangled hair and bright eyes, coloring a picture of a yellow house with a crooked purple roof. My daughter Claire stood near the sink, rinsing coffee cups. My son-in-law Daniel was in the living room checking his phone. Everything looked ordinary. That was what I kept remembering later, how ordinary it all looked. "Margaret, can you pass me the purple marker?" My hand stopped halfway toward my coffee. Claire's shoulders tightened, just for a second, but I saw it. "What did you call me, sweetheart?" I asked. Lily did not look up. "Margaret." I gave a small laugh, because sometimes laughing is what you do before you understand you have been hurt. "Since when do you call me that?" This time Lily looked at her mother first. That was the first warning. Claire dried her hands too quickly. "She heard me say your name and now she thinks it's funny." But Lily frowned. "No, you said we should call her Margaret now." The kitchen went still. Claire's face changed so fast most people would have missed it. A flash of panic, then a smile pulled tightly over it. "Lily, go show your brother your drawing." "But I'm not done." "Now, please." Lily slid from her chair and left the room, confused but obedient. I looked at my daughter. "You told her to stop calling me Grandma." Claire sighed like I was making something out of nothing. "Mom, it's not like that." "What is it like?" She kept wiping the counter even though it was already clean. "We just thought it might be healthier for the children to understand boundaries." "Boundaries? With all the changes lately." I stared at her. There had been no changes, not really. My husband Richard had been gone for 3 years, yes. I lived alone now. I was 66. I moved a little slower some mornings. I sometimes forgot where I left my reading glasses. But I still paid my bills, drove myself to appointments, cooked Sunday dinner, remembered birthdays, and kept my house cleaner than Claire kept hers. "What changes?" I asked. Claire would not meet my eyes. "Mom, please, don't turn this into an argument." That was the second warning. When people do something hurtful and then call your reaction an argument, they have already decided your feelings are the problem. Daniel walked into the kitchen then, smiling in that smooth way of his. "Everything okay?" I looked from him to Claire. "No," I said quietly. "Apparently I'm not Grandma anymore." Daniel's smile barely moved. "Margaret, nobody said that." There it was again. Margaret, not Mom, not Grandma, not Mrs. Bennet. Just Margaret, as if my place in the family had been quietly downgraded when I wasn't looking. Claire gave him a look I could not read. Then she turned back to me. "We're only trying to make things easier." "For whom?" Neither of them answered. The rest of the visit passed like a meal eaten through glass. Lily avoided calling me anything at all. Daniel spoke too politely. Claire watched me every time I reached for a word or paused too long. After they left, the house felt different. Not empty. Watched. I stood by the window and saw Claire helping Lily into the car. Lily looked back toward the house and lifted her little hand. I waved, smiling because I did not want her to see anything on my face. That evening, I found Claire's scarf on the chair in the hallway. Her phone was tucked inside it. I picked it up only to place it by the door, but the screen lit when my thumb brushed the side. A message notification filled the screen. From Michael, my son. "Did she notice Lily?" My breath stopped. Then another message appeared. "Claire, yes, she asked about it. We need to be more careful." Michael, Daniel said consistency matters. Consistency? About what? I knew I should put the phone down. I had never been the kind of mother who searched through private things. I raised my children to respect closed doors, sealed letters, and trust. But they were talking about me. Not to me, about me. My hands trembled as I read the preview lines visible on the locked screen. Michael, if the kids slip, she'll start questioning everything. Claire, she already is. Then a message from Daniel appeared. "Did you bring the forms?" Forms. I stood in the hallway with my daughter's phone in my hand and felt the whole house tilt around me. Not because of one name, not because a child said Margaret. Because in that moment, I understood something had been arranged before I ever entered the conversation. The next morning, Michael called before breakfast. He never called before noon. "Morning, Mom," he said, too cheerful. "Morning. How did you sleep?" The question landed strangely. "Fine. Good. Claire said you seemed a little upset yesterday." I looked at the kettle on the stove. "She told my granddaughter not to call me grandma." He paused. Only a second. "But silence tells the truth faster than words. It's just about helping the kids adjust." "Adjust to what?" Another pause. "Mom, don't get worked up." I closed my eyes. There it was, not angry. Not sad, not hurt, worked up. A small label placed gently over my reaction. "I'm not worked up, Michael. I'm asking a question. We're all just trying to plan ahead." "For what?" he exhaled. "Daniel has some papers he wanted you to review. Nothing serious. Emergency contacts, medical preferences, practical things." My stomach tightened. "Why is Daniel preparing papers for me? He knows more about this stuff." "This stuff? You know, aging, legal planning." I was silent for a moment. Then I said, "I have a lawyer. You haven't used him since Dad died. And that means I need Daniel." Michael's tone softened, and somehow that made it worse. "Mom, nobody's attacking you." I had not said anyone was, but he answered as if I had. After we hung up, I went into Richard's old office. I had not changed much in that room since he died. His books still lined the wall. His pens still sat in the little wooden cup near the lamp. On difficult days, I could almost convince myself he had only stepped out for coffee. I opened the filing cabinet and found the drawer disturbed. Not dramatically, just enough. A folder that belonged on the left was on the right. A clip was missing. The envelope containing insurance papers had been opened and tucked back carelessly. Someone had been through my documents, and I knew with sudden certainty it had not been a stranger. By noon, Daniel arrived. Claire was with him. He carried a leather folder and set it on my dining table like a man arriving for a business meeting. "Margaret," he said, "we thought it would be good to talk calmly." I did not sit. "What forms?" Claire looked startled. Daniel's fingers paused on the folder clasp. "What? You texted Claire about forms?" Claire's face went pale. Daniel recovered first. "We're concerned that you're misunderstanding things." I laughed once softly. It sounded nothing like me. "Then explain them." He opened the folder and slid out a stack of papers: medical release authorization, emergency decision support, financial assistance consent. The words blurred slightly, but one phrase stayed clear: temporary cognitive concern protocol. I looked up. Claire's eyes were wet. Daniel's were steady. That was the difference between them. My daughter was frightened. My son-in-law was prepared. "Do you think I'm losing my mind?" I asked. Claire whispered, "No, Mom." But Daniel said, "No one is saying that." Not the same answer. Not even close. I looked down at the papers again. Then I remembered Lily's small voice. Margaret. A name taught like a rule. A distance created before the paperwork arrived. And standing there in my own dining room, with my daughter crying and her husband watching me like he was waiting for the wrong reaction, I finally understood the first part of it. They were not just planning for my future. They were rehearsing my disappearance from my own family. I did not sign anything. That seemed to surprise Daniel more than Claire. Claire looked relieved at first, as though she had been hoping I would refuse so the conversation could end. But Daniel stayed calm in a way that immediately unsettled me. People who expect resistance are rarely worried by it. "Of course," he said smoothly, sliding the papers back into the folder. "There's no rush." No rush. As if he already knew there would eventually be another attempt. Claire stayed behind after Daniel left. She stood in the kitchen, twisting her wedding ring while I rinsed untouched coffee cups. Finally she said, "Mom, please don't make this harder." I turned off the faucet. "Harder for who?" "For everyone." There it was again. Everyone, not me, everyone else. I dried my hands slowly. "Do you actually believe I'm mentally unwell?" Claire's eyes filled instantly. "No." But she answered too fast, not honestly, automatically, like a child giving the correct answer during a test. "Then why are you letting Daniel bring me cognitive paperwork?" She rubbed her forehead. "It's not cognitive paperwork." I stared at her until she looked away. "Claire, he just thinks planning ahead is responsible." "And what do you think?" Silence. That frightened me more than anything else. Because my daughter had once been incapable of silence around me, Claire used to tell me everything: bad dates, school problems, fears she never admitted to anyone else. Now she stood in my kitchen like someone trying not to say the wrong thing. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes people don't notice changes in themselves." There it was, not an accusation. Something worse. A suggestion, a possibility. You cannot defend yourself against possibilities because they are built from doubt instead of facts. I lowered my voice. "What changes have you noticed?" Claire swallowed hard. "You repeat stories more. Everyone repeats stories. You get emotional quickly. Your father died. That was 3 years ago." The sentence hit like a slap, not because it was cruel. Because it sounded rehearsed. I suddenly imagined Daniel saying those exact words to her in private. 3 years ago, still emotional, still struggling. Little observations arranged carefully until grief itself begins looking suspicious. Claire stepped closer. "Mom, nobody wants to take anything away from you." I looked at the folder on the table. Medical forms, financial forms, decision support forms. Every piece of paper in that folder involved taking something away from me. That night, I could not stop thinking about my mother. Evelyn Carter, sharp-minded for most of her life. She read historical biographies until her late 80s and corrected newspaper grammar with a red pen. Then slowly, almost invisibly, she changed. Forgotten appointments, repeated questions, fear. By the end, she no longer recognized Claire some days. Claire had taken it hardest. I remembered her crying in the hospital parking lot after Grandma Evelyn asked who she was. "Do you think she knows she forgot me?" Claire had whispered. Maybe that was the seed Daniel watered. Fear rarely needs to be invented. It only needs direction. The next morning, I drove to the bank, not because I thought money was missing. Because suddenly, I needed proof that something in my life still belonged entirely to me. A young banker named Melissa greeted me with the bright professional smile younger people use with older women. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Bennett? I'd like to review my account permissions." "Of course," she typed for a moment, then her expression shifted, tiny, but noticeable. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "No," she said quickly, "just reviewing notes." "What notes?" She hesitated. "Your daughter requested information recently regarding future assisted account management options." The room seemed to lose sound. "When?" "About a month ago." A month. Before Lily stopped calling me grandma, before the paperwork, before any of this became visible to me at all. "What exactly did she ask?" Melissa looked uncomfortable. "General procedures involving aging family members." Aging family members. Such clean language for something so ugly. "She asked about cognitive decline protocols," Melissa admitted softly. "But no changes were made to your accounts." I sat perfectly still. Claire had gone to my bank behind my back, not because I had forgotten bills, not because I had made dangerous financial mistakes. Because she had already started preparing for the possibility that I might. Possibility again, that terrible word. I thanked Melissa and walked carefully back to my car. Halfway there, I stopped. Daniel's car was parked across the street. My stomach dropped. He was sitting inside, watching the bank. For one horrifying second, we simply stared at each other through the windshield. Then he smiled, not embarrassed, not caught, just calm. He stepped out as I approached. "Margaret," he said pleasantly, "small world. You followed me. I was nearby." Lie. Everything about him felt rehearsed now. I gripped my purse tighter. "Why were you watching the bank?" His expression never changed. "You're upset." "Claire worried you might make impulsive decisions." I almost laughed. Impulsive. Going to my own bank was now impulsive. "She sent you." "No one sent me anywhere. But you were waiting outside. You've seemed distressed lately." Distressed. Another carefully selected word. Not angry, not betrayed, distressed. Like a patient, I looked directly at him. "What exactly are you trying to do?" For the first time, something cold flickered behind his smile. "Protect the family." The family. Interesting choice of words. Not protect me. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. "From what?" He held my gaze calmly. From difficult situations later. Again later. Everything with him lived in the future. Future confusion, future decline, future danger, all invisible, all impossible to disprove. I drove home shaking with anger, not confusion, not fear, anger. Real, clear anger. When I walked into the house, I went straight to Richard's office and opened every drawer. If my family was preparing something behind my back, then I needed to know how long it had been happening. An hour later, buried beneath old insurance records, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's handwriting. Margaret. Just that. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a legal amendment dated 8 months before his death. At first it looked like ordinary estate paperwork. Then I reached a paragraph that made my chest tighten. In the event any attempt is made to establish involuntary family oversight of my wife's personal or financial affairs, independent legal review must be immediately initiated. I read it twice. Then 3 times, involuntary family oversight. Richard had anticipated this, maybe not specifically, but enough to protect against it. At the bottom of the page, beneath his signature, was a handwritten note. If anyone ever pushes too hard, ask why. I sat frozen in his chair. Ask why. Not who, not how, why. And suddenly, for the first time since all this started, another possibility entered my mind. What if this was not only about fear? What if someone in my family needed me to become incapable? That evening, Michael arrived unexpectedly. He let himself in with the spare key I had given him years ago. The second he saw the legal papers spread across the desk, his face changed. "Mom," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" Again carefully. Everyone spoke carefully around me now. "I found something your father left." Michael stepped closer slowly. Then his eyes landed on the amendment, and I watched all the color drain from his face. "You weren't supposed to find that yet," he whispered. The room went completely silent. Yet, not ever. Yet. I stared at my son so hard my eyes began to ache. "What did you just say?" Michael looked horrified with himself. For a moment, he truly resembled the little boy who used to confess things accidentally before inventing excuses. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then explain it." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across Richard's office before stopping near the bookshelf. "You're taking this too personally." I laughed softly. The sound frightened even me. "They're legal papers about controlling my life, Michael. How exactly should I take them?" His jaw tightened. "Nobody wants to control you." "Then why did Dad prepare protections against family oversight?" Michael looked away. That was answer enough. I stood slowly from the desk. "How long has this been happening?" "It hasn't." "Stop lying to me." He flinched, not dramatically, just enough for me to realize something important. My son was not used to me speaking to him this way anymore. Somewhere along the line, they had already begun expecting softness from me. Cooperation. Fragility, not resistance. Michael lowered his voice. "Mom, Daniel's only trying to prepare everyone." "For what?" "You know what happened to Grandma Evelyn." There it was again, always circling back to my mother. "She developed dementia at 89. And the doctor said symptoms can start years before families notice." I folded Richard's amendment carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. "Did Daniel tell you that?" Michael hesitated too long. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he had. "When did he start talking to you about me?" Michael sat heavily in the chair across from Richard's desk. "At first it wasn't serious. At first, after Dad died, he said grief can sometimes hide cognitive decline." I stared at him. "And you believed that?" "He wasn't saying you were sick. Just that families should pay attention early." Pay attention early. Another harmless phrase turned poisonous. Michael rubbed his forehead. "Then there were little things." "What little things?" "You forgot Ethan's birthday dinner last year." "I had pneumonia." "You accused Claire of moving your paperwork," because she had. "You got lost driving home from the pharmacy." "The road was closed." Every explanation sounded defensive the moment it left my mouth. That was the trap. Normal mistakes transformed into evidence through repetition. I suddenly realized they had probably spent months reviewing my life together, collecting moments and arranging them into a pattern. Not because I was declining, because once people expect decline, they begin seeing it everywhere. Michael looked exhausted now. You don't understand what this has been like. No, I said quietly. I don't. He looked up at me then, eyes full of something close to guilt. Claire cries all the time. The anger inside me shifted painfully. Why? Because she thinks she's losing you. I leaned against the desk to steady myself, not because I was weak, because that sentence hurt more than the paperwork ever could. Daniel had not convinced my children to hate me. He convinced them to mourn me in advance. And grief changes people. It makes them desperate, careful, controlling. Did either of you ever stop and ask whether Daniel benefits from all this? I asked. Michael frowned immediately. What does that mean? It means your brother-in-law seems very interested in my finances. That's unfair. Is it? Michael stood again. You're starting to sound paranoid. There it was. The word arrived so naturally from him that I knew he had already used it privately before. Not suspicious. Not hurt. Paranoid. A medical word. I looked at my son for a very long moment. Then quietly I said, Do you know he followed me to the bank today? Michael blinked. What? He was sitting outside watching the entrance. That doesn't make sense. Exactly. For the first time since entering the room, Michael looked genuinely unsettled. I stepped closer. He told me Claire was worried I'd make impulsive financial decisions. Michael's face changed. Not completely, but enough. A crack. You went to the bank. Interesting. Not why was Daniel there? Why did you go? I almost smiled from disbelief. Yes, Michael, I visited my own bank. He rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Maybe he was just concerned. About what? You've seemed emotional lately. Again, emotional, every feeling carefully relabeled into instability. I suddenly felt tired beyond words, not old. Just tired, tired of being translated into symptoms by people who once knew me better than anyone. Michael left soon afterward. Before going, he paused at the front door. Then quietly said, Mom. Maybe if you just cooperated a little, everyone would calm down. Cooperated. That word stayed with me long after he drove away. Not talked, not discussed, cooperated. As though resistance itself proved I was becoming difficult. That night, I called the attorney listed in Richard's amendment. Helen Weaver. She answered personally. The moment I introduced myself, silence filled the line. Not confused silence, recognizing silence. I wondered when you'd call, she said softly. A chill moved through me. You knew about this. I knew Richard was worried. About Daniel, another pause. Yes, I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Helen's voice remained calm and precise. Your husband believed pressure might eventually be placed on you regarding your estate. Estate, not health, not family, estate. He thought Daniel wanted money. He thought Daniel viewed your assets as security. Security. I looked around my kitchen. The house Richard and I bought 40 years earlier. The savings we built together. The insurance policies. The investments. Everything suddenly felt less like a life and more like inventory. Did Richard tell Claire or Michael? No, why not? Because he believed they loved you. I nearly cried then, not because of fear. Because even after suspecting danger, Richard still trusted our children's hearts. Helen continued carefully. There's something else you need to know. I gripped the phone tighter. What? Daniel has significant financial debt. The room tilted. How significant? Enough that your husband hired someone to investigate. I closed my eyes. Richard knew. He knew enough to investigate privately before he died. How bad is it? There were failed investment projects, refinanced loans, personal guarantees. My mouth went dry. And Claire knows none of this. I don't believe so. Everything became horribly clear all at once. The urgency, the preparation, the future planning, the pressure. Daniel was not preparing for my decline. He was preparing for my money, and somehow he had convinced my children they were protecting me while helping him do it. Helen lowered her voice slightly. Margaret, listen carefully to me now. I straightened instinctively. You cannot react emotionally from this point forward. I laughed once bitterly. That seems impossible. No. It's necessary. Why? Because any strong reaction you have is likely already being documented. Every sound in my kitchen disappeared. What? There is almost certainly a behavioral record being created. Behavioral record. My heart began pounding slowly, not quickly, slowly. The way it does when something terrible finally becomes undeniable. Helen spoke gently now. Richard suspected Daniel would attempt to build a narrative before making any formal legal moves. Narrative. That was exactly what this was. Not one accusation, not one event. A story built carefully over time. Forgetfulness, grief, emotion, resistance. Tiny pieces arranged until a healthy woman begins looking unstable on paper. Then Helen said the sentence that changed everything. If you want to stop this, you need proof before Daniel decides it's time to move forward officially. I swallowed hard. What happens if he does? Silence. Then very quietly, he may try to convince the court your independence is no longer safe. For the next week, I began doing something I never imagined I would do to my own family. I started paying attention to them the way they had been paying attention to me. Not emotionally, carefully. I wrote things down, dates, conversations, contradictions. The notebook stayed hidden beneath old sweaters in the back of my closet. Part of me hated myself for it. The other part remembered Helen Weaver's warning. Narratives are fought with records. Once I started watching closely, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Claire called constantly now, too constantly. Did you sleep okay? What are you doing today? Did you remember your appointment? Have you eaten? On the surface, they sounded like loving questions, but together they formed surveillance. One afternoon, she asked 3 separate times whether I had taken my blood pressure medication. I did not even take blood pressure medication. When I reminded her of that, she laughed awkwardly and said, "See, this is exactly why we worry. You sound irritated all the time lately." Somehow her mistake became evidence against me. Daniel was worse. He began appearing unexpectedly, a bag of groceries at the door, an offer to organize my bills, suggestions about simplifying my finances. Everything delivered in that calm professional voice that made ordinary conversations sound like consultations. One evening, he arrived carrying takeout containers and smiling warmly. "Claire thought you shouldn't eat alone tonight." I let him inside because refusing felt dangerous now. That was the worst part. Every choice had become loaded. If I accepted help, they would say I depended on them. If I refused help, they would say I was isolating myself. Daniel placed the food on the counter while casually scanning the kitchen. His eyes paused on the mail, on the filing cabinet, on Richard's office door. Inventory again, always inventory. We sat at the dining table in uncomfortable silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. "You seem tense around me lately." I almost laughed. "You're preparing cognitive paperwork about me. We're preparing support systems." Support systems, such soft language for control. Daniel folded his hands calmly. "Margaret, families who wait too long often regret it. There's nothing wrong with me. No one says there is, but everyone speaks like there might be." He studied me for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Denial is usually strongest early." The sentence hit like ice water, not because I believed it, because I realized how impossible this situation had become. Every defense became proof. I leaned back slowly. "Do you know what my mother's first symptom actually was?" He blinked. "What?" "She became afraid of strangers." Daniel stayed silent. "She thought people were stealing from her, watching her, manipulating her." I held his gaze. "So tell me honestly, Daniel, if I accuse my family of trying to control me financially, doesn't that fit your narrative perfectly?" For the first time since this began, he did not answer immediately. That silence terrified me more than words would have. Because he knew I understood the trap, then his expression softened again. "We only want what's best for you." No, he wanted what worked best for him. The next morning, I met Helen Weaver in person. Her office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. She listened quietly while I described everything Daniel had been saying. When I finished, she removed her glasses slowly. "He's escalating." My chest tightened. "What does that mean?" It means resistance is frustrating him. I looked down at my hands. He told Michael I'm paranoid. Helen nodded grimly. That's predictable. Predictable, as though she had seen this exact story before. Can they really do this? I asked softly. Legally, yes, successfully. That depends. On what? Whether people believe the narrative before you can expose the motivation behind it. Motivation, money, control, fear. Helen opened a thin folder beside her. I had someone continue looking into Daniel's finances. The look on her face alone made my stomach sink. It's worse than we thought. She slid several papers toward me. Late payment notices. Refinanced debt agreements. Court warnings. One number near the bottom made my breath catch. Daniel owed nearly $400,000. I stared at the page. How is that possible? Bad investments, failed partnerships, personal borrowing. And Claire does know. I would be shocked if she knew the full amount. I leaned back in stunned silence. $400,000. Suddenly everything moved into focus with horrifying clarity. My house alone was worth nearly enough to solve most of it. The house Richard and I spent 40 years paying for. The house where my children learned to walk. The house Daniel kept calling too large for one person. Helen watched me carefully. There's another issue. I looked up slowly. What now? He may already be preparing a medical evaluation request. The room seemed to shrink. What exactly does that mean? It means he convinces the family there are enough warning signs to justify professional assessment. And if I refuse, she held my gaze steadily. Refusal itself may be presented as evidence. I closed my eyes. Of course, every road led back into the same trap. Then Helen leaned forward slightly. But there's something Daniel doesn't realize yet. I looked at her. He's becoming careless. That surprised me. Careless? Manipulative people are patient until they think they're close to winning. She tapped the debt file gently. He's under pressure now. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides fear. Hope, small, dangerous, but real. That weekend, Claire invited me to Ethan's soccer game. I almost declined. But Helen advised me to continue acting normally. Isolation helps them, she warned. Visibility helps you. So I went. The field was crowded with folding chairs and exhausted parents holding coffee cups. Ethan waved excitedly when he saw me. "Grandma!" The word echoed across the field before Claire could stop him. I saw it immediately. That tiny flash of panic crossing her face. Not anger, fear, as though she worried someone might hear. Then Lily ran toward me too, hugging my waist tightly. "Mommy says I confuse people when I call you Grandma," she whispered. The world seemed to stop. I crouched slowly to her level. "What people?" she shrugged. "Grown-ups." Behind her, Claire was walking toward us quickly, too quickly. "What are you talking about?" she asked Lily sharply. Lily looked frightened instantly. "You said, go sit with Ethan, sweetheart." Lily ran off. Claire forced a smile toward me, but her hands were trembling. "She misunderstands things." "No," I said quietly. "She repeats things." Claire's expression cracked for 1 second, then unexpectedly, tears filled her eyes, real tears. "Mom, please." The desperation in her voice startled me, not manipulation. Not acting, desperation. "Do you actually believe I'm sick?" I asked softly. Claire looked at me like a child lost in fog. "I don't know anymore." That answer hurt more than anything else so far. Because I finally understood the true damage Daniel had caused. He had not convinced my children that I was unstable. He convinced them uncertainty itself was safer than trusting me. And uncertainty spreads like poison. Once people begin doubting your mind, they stop listening to your reality. 3 days later, Claire invited me to dinner again. Not asked, invited. The wording mattered now. Everything mattered now. I almost refused, but something in her voice during the phone call unsettled me. She sounded exhausted, not emotionally dramatic, drained. "Please come," she said quietly. "The kids miss you." "The kids, not we miss you." I arrived at 6 exactly. Daniel opened the door. His smile appeared immediately, smooth and practiced as always, but his eyes looked tired for the first time since this all began. Pressure, I thought. Helen was right. He was under pressure. "Margaret," he said warmly. "Good to see you." I walked past him without answering. Claire was in the kitchen setting plates on the table while Lily colored beside the window, and Ethan played a game on the floor. For a few minutes, everything felt almost normal again. Dangerously normal. Then Lily looked up and asked, "Grandma, can I show you my drawing later?" The room froze, not visibly, but I felt it. Daniel's hand stopped near his glass. Claire's eyes flickered toward me. Waiting, watching, I smiled gently at Lily. "Of course, sweetheart." Claire quickly changed the subject. Too quickly, that tiny moment told me everything. They had trained the children carefully enough that even hearing the word grandma now created tension inside the house. During dinner, Daniel spoke almost constantly. Mortgage rates, retirement planning, housing markets, always circling the same subjects. Finally, he leaned back casually and said, "Honestly, this house market is probably the best opportunity you'll ever have to downsize." There it was again. The house. Always the house. "I'm not selling my home," I said calmly. "No one said you had to, but you mention it every week." Claire shifted uncomfortably. Daniel smiled lightly. "We're only thinking ahead." I set my fork down carefully. "You know what's interesting?" Silence settled across the table. "What?" Daniel asked. "You always say we." His expression barely changed. "We are family." "No," I said quietly. "You speak for everyone before they speak for themselves." Claire looked immediately anxious. "Mom, does Claire actually want me to sell my house?" Claire's mouth opened slightly, then closed. That silence answered me before she ever spoke. Daniel jumped in smoothly. "Nobody wants to pressure you." Pressure. Another gentle word, like support, concern, preparation. Everything softened until control barely sounded like control anymore. I looked directly at Claire. "Do you know how much debt your husband has?" The entire table went still. Daniel's face finally changed. Not panic, something colder, dangerous. Claire blinked. "What?" I held Daniel's eyes while answering. $400,000. "Mom," Daniel said sharply, "that's inappropriate." Interesting, not false, inappropriate. Claire stared at him in confusion. "What is she talking about?" Daniel leaned forward calmly, but I saw tension in his jaw now. "She's upset and trying to lash out." There it was. The narrative again. Not truthful, not observant, upset. I reached slowly into my purse and removed copies of the debt records Helen gave me. Then I placed them on the table. Daniel stood immediately. "Do not do this." Too late. Claire picked up the first page. At first she frowned in confusion. Then slowly, visibly, the color left her face. Michael arrived 20 minutes later. Claire had called him crying. By the time he entered the house, the atmosphere felt poisoned. Daniel stood near the kitchen island, speaking quietly into his phone when Michael walked in. Claire sat frozen at the table staring at the financial records spread before her. "What happened?" Michael asked. Nobody answered immediately. Then Claire whispered, "Did you know?" Michael looked confused. "Know what?" She pushed the papers toward him. I watched my son's expression collapse page by page. "This can't be right." "It is," I said quietly. Daniel ended his call and walked back into the kitchen. For the first time since I had known him, he looked openly angry. "You had someone investigate me." "No," I answered calmly. "Richard did." That hit him. I saw it instantly. Michael looked up sharply. "Dad knew enough to create legal protections." Claire's breathing became uneven. "What protections?" I removed Richard's amendment from my purse and placed it beside the debt records. Daniel moved fast then, too fast. He grabbed the paper before Claire could reach it, but Michael stepped between them immediately. "Give it to me." Daniel smiled tightly. "This isn't helping anyone. Give me the paper." For one long second, neither moved. Then Daniel handed it over. Michael read silently. Claire watched his face instead of the document. And when she saw his expression change, something inside her finally broke. "You told me Mom was becoming unstable," she whispered to Daniel. "I said we needed to prepare. You said the lawyer recommended family oversight. Because your mother's behavior, my behavior," I interrupted quietly. Everyone looked at me. For the first time all evening, I felt completely calm. Not because things were improving, because the truth had finally entered the room. You monitored my bank visits. You trained my grandchildren to distance themselves from me. You prepared cognitive paperwork before I even knew it existed. I looked at Claire. And you let him convince you that my reactions to all of this were symptoms. Claire began crying hard now, not graceful crying, devastated crying. I thought we were helping you, she whispered. I believed her, that was the tragedy. Daniel had not manipulated my children through greed. He manipulated them through fear, fear of becoming too late, fear of missing signs. Fear of ending up helpless and guilty, the way Claire still felt about Grandma Evelyn. Michael looked sick. Then quietly, he asked Daniel the question I had been waiting for. When exactly did you start all this? Daniel's silence lasted too long, and suddenly everyone understood. Not after strange behavior, not after confusion, not after danger, before, long before. Before the paperwork, before the concern, before Lily stopped calling me Grandma, Claire stared at her husband like she no longer recognized him. You were planning this while Mom was healthy. Daniel finally lost patience. You don't understand the financial pressure we were under. There it was. Not concern, pressure, money. His calm mask cracked completely now. You think retirement care is free. You think this family survives if something happens later. No, I said softly. You were trying to survive your debt. Silence, complete silence. The children stood frozen near the hallway listening to everything. Then Lily walked slowly toward me, small, quiet, confused. She wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered the word they had spent months trying to erase. Grandma! Claire started sobbing harder. Michael sat down heavily, staring at nothing. And Daniel finally looked afraid, not because he was losing money, because the narrative had collapsed. The story he built so carefully no longer worked once everyone saw the reason behind it. A week later, Claire separated from him. The cognitive paperwork disappeared. The legal consultations stopped. The children began calling me Grandma openly again. But damage like that does not vanish quickly. For months afterward, I caught Claire watching me sometimes, if I forgot a date, repeated a story. Misplaced my glasses. Fear flashed across her face before she could stop it. That was the cruelest thing Daniel took from us, not trust, certainty. He taught my children that normal aging could be mistaken for disappearance at any moment. Last Sunday, Lily and I baked cookies together in my kitchen while rain tapped softly against the windows. Halfway through mixing the dough, she looked up at me and asked, Grandma, yes, sweetheart, why did Mommy stop calling you Margaret again? I brushed flour gently from her cheek. Because she remembered who I was. And slowly, so did the rest of my family.